So, current state detail process. So again, here's the model. So we're talking about step 3, and as I said, we've double-clicked on these. And whether Alan likes it or not, we have expanded on his visual graphic images for better or for worse. So in a current state, the kinds of things you will be doing are obviously the site readiness stuff and getting the team ready and scheduling a kickoff and communicating and conducting a kickoff. We're going to talk a little bit about that much later. But the core of the activity is around process flows, it's around gathering data, it's around assessing those data and the gaps, it's on putting together a story that data tells you, and then presenting that story and recommendations to somebody who says, yep, I think you've uncovered these highest priority opportunities, so go fix them. So we're going to focus, at least for the rest of this morning and into the afternoon, around 3.5 through 3.9. Qualitative diagnostics versus quantitative diagnostics. Qualitative diagnostics. So again, what we're trying to do is get background and context. You're looking for anecdotal evidence, so the stories that people tell you, and I don't know if anybody see an American Pie, the movie? So this one time at band camp stuff. Right? So I remember when this machine broke down. I remember one time Susie did this and it caused me all. You want those kinds of anecdotes. You're also looking for the real process. So the activities, the sequencing, who does what. Again, different from what the process or procedure manual they may give you says. You're looking for performance snapshots. So again, it may not be a exhaustive data-driven study, but you're looking for bits and pieces where you can get them, and then just any other information that illustrates how the current process is executed and where people think the issues are. So the qualitative stuff kind of gives you the war stories and the color commentary that support the data-driven conclusions, but usually, sometimes they are, but usually they're not conclusive in nature. Just because somebody told you this is all messed up, until I've got the data that helps me prove it, it's still just somebody's opinion. So when you're making the presentation, you can say, here's the story I heard, and look what the data says. They're not making it up. This is really the case. Or somebody may say, but yeah, but so-and-so said this. Well, here's the data. Show me where in the data that story is proven, right? So it's a different kind of data gathering exercise. Part of the qualitative is process mapping. Sort of the foundation, the number of people who think a BPI project and process mapping are exactly the same thing within KT is kind of scary. Just because you drew a flow chart doesn't mean you've done a BPI. But it's hard to do a BPI without the flow chart. So we'll talk a little bit about, I think we will, there we go. So, and again, these are, as you can tell from the background, really old slides, but essentially, if you've never done a process map, this is your general introduction to doing process maps. So you're looking to document the current process, analyze its performance, look for areas where you think there's significant improvement, and forget that last statement, draft alternative process options. Making process input steps and outputs visible to further analyze. The thing I try to get with people who have not done it, at least in the context of a BPI and process map, is I don't want it, in a current state analysis, I don't want it to look pretty. I want it to show all the warts and all the faults. I want to show all the unnecessary loops, all the exceptions that yeah, it's supposed to be this, but sometimes it's this, sometimes it's this. So you're really trying to kind of document the pain that they're living with. Two pieces of it. One is a process definition record, one is the flow chart itself. So a process definition record, this is the form that we've kind of settled on in North America. Now, Jens, did you use this at TDW?
Sidewalk we used.
Okay, that's all this is, the sidewalk, right? The thing that I find valuable, again, if you're looking to manage scope, having this is invaluable. If you are looking for a framework around which to go to your process map, I find this invaluable. And the interesting thing is you would think these are relatively simple, straightforward things to facilitate. They're not always. So again, I'm looking for, and I do these two different ways, and now we're going to get into the nuts and bolts here. Some processes, it's easier to start with the outputs and then go to the inputs. Others, it's easier to start with the inputs and go to outputs. And again, you'll just know it when you see it. I wish I had better advice as to which made sense based on what kinds of situations. But essentially, when I facilitate this, and it's typically with a group of people who are process participants, so at the end of the day, what are you responsible for producing? What are all the things that come out, and who's looking for those things? So that's, yeah.
And it's the level of detail you've got to watch out for.
That's right.
Because two people working on the same process probably can work on different levels.
That's right.
And this sheet has to fit to the next process.
That's right.
And if they're working on two different levels, you are
That's right.
in the mess.
Yeah, so you will have multiple ones of these. So for example, at Kennecott, we did one of these for the small jobs, or the non-standard. We did one for the operation services, and we did one for the big projects. So again, the outputs and who's looking for them, the inputs and who provides them, and then in 6 to 7, 10 steps, tell me the major steps of the process so that I know when to go talk to people. So you're in this process, we're in this sub-step, tell me about how you do this piece of this broader process. Again, you'll talk about the things that are sort of the process requirements, so the policies, procedures, regs, standards. So this is where that's where you can fit when they give you the procedure manual. So that's something that should guide how this process really works. In the mining industry, MSHA and OSHA are obviously guiding regulations, etc. And then also the IT systems, because a lot of people think I forget what they're called in the IT world, but the thing that shows the data relationship maps are process maps. No, that's just how data feeds one database to the other, or one file to the other, or whatever. So capturing the information system separately kind of takes some of that out, so that it's more of a, when I videotape you execute this process, what am I watching you doing, right? Sometimes this conversation around process owner is irrelevant. In many immature organizations, and by immature I'm talking about their robustness around managing processes, they have no idea, A, what a process owner is, and even if they do understand the concept, they have absolutely no idea. Nobody's raising their hand saying, yeah, that's me. The other thing that's always an interesting conversation is the process objective. So at the end of the day, why are you doing this process in the first place? So again, it's a vital conversation to have before you start going to do the interviews, because it kind of puts into context how you're going to go gather the data in order to draw the process map of the current state. Questions about the PDR, the process definition record? That's not it. So once you've got that, then it becomes much easier to start doing the flow chart. So it's the process and its outputs, what starts the process, and what actions you take from input to output. So again, this is very old. So steps for checking into the hotel. Oops. So those are the steps. Here's what the flow chart looks like. Again, if you need me to go into detail about how to do a flow chart, I'm happy to hold a symposium on it. But if not, I'll move on.
Will you touch on software to use, or is that a topic left out here? Software recommendations besides.
Yeah, I can talk on it. Yeah, so let me see. I forget what all is in here. So again, when you're doing the flow chart, you're looking for areas of waste and complexity, better ways, making the process steps visible, and that's where it becomes a fine art of how much pain do you put them into. You will hear them describe to you really stupid ways that they do things, and you need to graphically capture that, even if people are going to look at it and say, that's stupid, because that's the point here. So you're looking for the, well, I give it to so-and-so, and then half the time they return to me and I have to do this to it, and then I give it back to them. You're looking for those things, and you want to draw them in all their ugly, ugly detail. Looking for disconnects. So I do this thing and I put it in this basket, and I have absolutely no idea what happens to it next. Is always an interesting piece of work. Or I don't know where this comes from, but it's always wrong, and so to fix it, I do this, 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 and this. Good information. And then again, if they've got ISO or procedure manuals, it's always an interesting exercise to say, well, procedure manual says you're supposed to do this, this, and this. How do you really do it? And have that kind of should actual kind of comparison. Sometimes value stream mapping makes sense, and I'm not going to give a teach on value stream mapping, but again, depending on what you're trying to show and evaluate value stream mapping, sometimes it doesn't have to be a functional flow chart, but I usually end up doing, at least in some way, shape, or form, some level of functional flow charting, because oftentimes it's a roles and responsibilities issue that I need to highlight. So the functional flow charting of the swim lane, at least we call it in the States, is not only what are the inputs, what are the steps, and what are the outputs, but also who does what in that context. And I won't read that to you, but they look like, I'm not going to go through that certainly. They look like this. So you've got the ability to show each of the functions and where the handoffs occur and who's involved in doing which activities, which again helps highlight things like redundant work. So this person does this to it. No, guess what? At the same time, this other person's trying to do the exact same thing to it, and then it goes to this person and have to decide which one to believe, kind of stuff.
What is your take on the software here in terms of as a function, as who?
I prefer to use Visio. That is
No.
my, oh,
I mean, for example, in this example, the program management uses ERP system. Would you put it as a task? Or what is your recommendation?
Here is how I tend to do it. This is one of those sections I know I have something up there. Do we have to? Sure, I don't know what you're asking me, but I'll say yes. With respect to software, I tend to do it in this way. I tend to put in a column that's called IT, and I use that to capture the software piece, what data is captured, who's doing what, and keep it separate from this. That's a preference, not a rule. I just find that to be easier.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
Yeah, at TDW we did the same with the ERP system. So
Yeah, keep one line at the bottom of the top line for data capturing.
Every once in a while, I may have another one that is a policy, regulations, etc. So when I do this step, it's governed by this FDA section of this particular policy, and again, so it's the other third thing that I sometimes do is have a timeline swim lane. So if I can describe it linearly and it's relatively accurate in its depiction.
You've got a timeline under
Yeah,
here.
exactly. So those are the three things I add. The other thing, not so much in the current state, but certainly in the future state, is sometimes I make up swim lanes that you'll never see on an org chart. As a matter of fact, we created a swim lane at Kennecott called Scoper. That is a person who does not have it in any job description that does the scopes of work for small jobs. And it doesn't exist today. We're going to need to create the capabilities to do these specific things, and right now we're just going to give a name called Scoper. So again, it's not, doesn't have to directly correspond to a box on an org chart. Oftentimes you'll find more than one function filling the same role. Other times you will find the same function, or excuse me, the opposite of that, which would be, that sort of the miracle happens here is it's supposed to happen here, and it doesn't. Sometimes it's Fred, sometimes it's Sally, sometimes it's Susie, so let's put it in this lane because there should be some function that doesn't exist today, but there isn't.
Or an hierarchical company which all of a sudden a matrix organization through it.
Yes.
You get those kinds of different stupid.
Yeah, the more matrix the organization, the less value this has.
Yes.
And that's why it just becomes a, I forget the name for it, but not functional, but just a,
It's just a value stream.
it's a value stream without
It's a pure
function.
value stream that you
Right.
create. Yeah.
The other thing, now, doing these in terms of the actual, what does it look like, a couple different ways. Both with pros and cons, or each with pros and cons. I could interview the client, and then interview the CRM, and then interview the project manager, and then interview the delivery resource, and then at the end of the day, put all the pieces of the puzzle together into this map, and then go back to each one and say, here's what I think I heard you saying, does this make sense? There's value in that it respects the client's time best of all. It's difficult and it takes a lot longer. And again, as somebody doing it, you need to be comfortable with the fact that what you think you heard wasn't what you really heard, and they're going to look at you and say, weren't you listening? It's not like that, it's like this, and that's fine. Another way of doing it is to get all these 5 different people in a room and say, all right, let's start with the beginning and just tell me what happens. Oh, I do this, and then what do you do? I give it to so-and-so. Now what do you do when you get that thing? And that is valuable in, you will get more description of the white space. So I'll say, well, I do this, and then I give it to Jens, and Jens will say, no, you don't. I get that from Steph. So you'll get a lot more robustness in the white space. The bad part is that if I'm talking about what happens from here to here, these guys are sitting in a room saying, what the hell am I doing in this room? They're not even talking about shit that pertains to me. So it wastes a bit more in small increments of the client's time, but you get a more accurate work product. The other way is, which is probably the worst of both worlds, is the client will say, well, I'll go off and I'll map this for you, and then I'll bring it in and we'll all talk about it. And the chances are that they will be describing to you either how they think it happens, but it doesn't necessarily really happen that way, or how they wish it would happen, but that's not current state, that's called future state. So it's a lot more difficult for the client to pull themselves out of what they live with on a day-to-day basis and draw the map for you. But those are your 3 alternatives.
What is your method of displaying a chain of non-structured processes? In terms of if they do it as it comes, if there are multiple ways of doing something,
Yeah.
and you ask 4 people, you get 5 different answers. You've got a special
Couple things.
technique?
Yeah, a couple things. One is, if they truly are doing it differently, then I want to get a couple different examples of how it gets done without doing an exhaustive ISO documentation exercise, because that's not the point. And actually I'll show you an example, because we had, remember I told you about big projects, each of the project managers did it differently, but they each did it okay. In other words, they hit most of the steps that we would consider to be good project planning, but Fred did it one way, Susie did it another way. At the end of the day, they all got to about the same place, but they did it differently. And what we agreed was, yeah, they all do it differently. It's not as important to understand how each one individually does it, but we need to, in the future state, settle on one best way. So we can circle one best way project. And what we did was we took the best from each of the worlds of the project manager and said, oh, that's the really neat that I use that you've probably never seen before. And we kind of pieced all that stuff together. The other thing I will do is a couple things, and they're more just facilitation techniques than anything. I will first ask them to describe an average day. So it's not the worst day you've ever had, it's not the perfect day, but show me the average day, which kind of gives me the straight line. Here's 75 to 80% of what it looks like normally. I will then get them to describe the worst day ever and start to figure out where, when exceptions occur to the straight line, those things happen. Because everybody wants to talk extremes anyway. Oh, these things take forever, and there's 8,000 passes. Yeah, but that's not every day. Tell me about what the average thing looks like, and let's get that down first, agree that. And now tell me about the kinds of things that are the most frequent variances from the normal day. And again, that's just, if I was king of the world and could describe to you how I would prefer to do a process map, I would have all the process participants in a room. I would have a big piece of brown paper on the wall, a couple pads of Post-it notes, and we just start at the beginning and just walk on through till we got to the end.
Thank you.
You're welcome. That. Actually, this is reminding me to be here. Yes, it is. So that is one vital piece of qualitative work that you'll typically do on a BPI project. You will spend a significant of your time talking to people, obviously. One of the things that annoys me most about new people is they don't want to go talk to anyone. So they'll sit in the room and they'll draw which is even worse than a client doing, is they'll draw what they think it is. And there's zero value added when you do that. So the interviewing, again, it's a matter of, if we're talking about skilling people up and getting them ready, this is what we used when we brought the new people on to do the site-wide rollout at Kennecott, so it is Kennecott flavored. But again, things like preparing for the interview, actually doing the interview, reviewing the notes, using interviewing to build process flows, guess what, going back and validating and confirming with the client, here's what I think I heard, and here's graphically what it looks like, does that reflect what you really meant to say, and then rinse and repeat. So, and again, this is for somebody who's never done an interview in a BPI project. So know who you're going to meet and why you're trying to meet with them. Again, trying to respect their time and make sure you get what you're looking for. So on the first pass, these were the kinds of people we were looking for so that we could get an understanding of how they manage contractors today. So who oversees them while they're doing the work on site, who approves the quality, et cetera, et cetera. So we discussed in a room, just KT people, before we go out and start willy-nilly knocking on doors, let's think about who we want to try and go find and put some names to. And so these were the questions that we wanted to get answers to. Then we talked about an elevator speech. So when you go in there, to your point about, if you explain it one way and I explain it a different way, it's a bit confusing. Here's an example of an elevator speech. Tailor it to your own personal style. But we're working to improve their ability to prepare and oversee contractor work in order to keep them safe, yada, yada, yada. That's why I'm here talking to you. And then here's the questions that we want to try and get answers to from each of those people that we go talk to. So again, I won't read them, but again, these were talked about in a bird room with KT employees before, so we had different people trying to ask the same kinds of questions and telling people the same story as to why they're asking. Can I have a sample? That's the other thing around process mapping. The more of their things that look familiar to them you can get on the brown paper, the better off you are. So if they say, well, I fill out a work order, can I have an example? I've done big brown papers where I've actually shown their paper trail with their live documents. So that's going to be very powerful. I won't go through all those. But again, there's a wide variety. And again, these weren't all necessarily asked and answered in the same meeting. Maybe a series of meetings. I've got an hour for you now. Can I come back tomorrow? And I've got a couple of follow-up questions, etc. We wanted to get this. How many of you know Robert Binney? Okay.
Unfortunately.
This was put together by Robert, so Robert has some uniquely American ways of saying things. So get souvenirs. In other words, we want work product samples of things that they work with so that we can understand what it is when they say, I fill out a SHA. Well, what's a SHA look like? What's on there? Interview challenges, so building trust. One of the other things to be aware of is you will hear some things and you've got to negotiate whether or not what you're hearing is something that is repeatable or attributable. So if you're going to tell me something, if it starts to sound sensitive or ideally before you sit down and talk about it, understand what your confidentiality promises are to the client. So if everything they say is on the record, then you need to tell them that so that they can police what they say for themselves. If we've said that we're going to blind responses, make sure that when you're going to say something, it is blinded. In other words, you can say, well, so I'm not naming names, but so and so said this, and everybody in the room will say, oh, that was him. So understand what those are. Ask permission to take notes, and one of the rules I have on just about every project I've done is if you want to take my notebook and look at everything I wrote down after I'm done talking to you, be my guest. Understand distractions. The other promise I make when I'm doing these interviews is, is that beer?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. I love Germany.
Unfortunately, no.
Yeah. I don't want to be the consultant that caused your production line to go down or your company to go bankrupt because you were stuck in a meeting talking to me. So if something urgent at work comes up, please tell me to get lost, come back later, take the phone call if you need to take it. So having that understanding. And there's nothing better than seeing it for yourself. And that was one of the things, particularly with this, was I had contracts administrators who sat in an office and planned their work some of the day, and then once the contractors were on site, were responsible for periodically going out and checking on the work and the progress, and et cetera, et cetera. We had one or two instances where people would say, oh yeah, so then they go out there and then they have this conversation. Well, did you go out there and see that? No, but he told me. Yeah, he tells you one thing, he sometimes does another. Back in the old Proudfoot days, the first lesson that I got from the first chief I had was, the client lies. And they do.
In God we trust, everybody else provides data.
That's right. So yeah, I go out there. I go out there 5 times a day to monitor. Well, can I do a dialo study on you? How come you haven't left the office since 8 o'clock this morning and it's now 3 p.m.? You know, so it's those kinds of things. The other thing, and it's interesting that Mr. Binney put this up there because it was his observation, and he was probably the most frequent violator of this rule, is you don't have the answers, they do. I took anybody meet Michael Hall from a few years back? He sold a API project at Tribune. It was Yano who came in and did it. It's a newspaper company. And so he'd been there once or twice, actually got a real good relationship with the GM of this newspaper printing facility. And so he calls me, he's like, I think I got an API project. So we start taking the first plant tour. And guess who gave me the fucking plant tour? Michael did. So this press over here, and you know, they have a real hard time getting, I'm like, Michael, shut up. This ain't your plant. Let the plant manager explain to me that. And so be very, very careful that you're not trying to, A, give them what you think are the answers, because that's zero value add, or B, trying to solve the problem. That's the other thing, especially K-tiers, is you'll be out there and they'll say, yeah, this machine really takes a long time to get set. Well, let's do the is, and let's do the is not, let's do the what, whatever. It's like, you're not there to fix it. Again, it's painful and it's hard for KT folks, but you want them to tell you how much pain they're in, and you're not going to do a damn thing about it at this point in time. So again, these are all sorts of challenges that you have in your interview. Process mapping, again, we went through this before, but it's, like I said, I prefer the post-it note approach. Swim lanes is usually how it ends up. So validating the interview. So after taking it, so you're going to do a series of interviews. You're looking for things where Fred says it's A and Sally says it's B. You're looking for making sure, especially if you're doing EMEA interviews, to make sure, well, this happens, and then it comes from somebody else, and you don't have that somebody in between. You're then using those interview notes to construct the process map. There are going to be boxes and arrows that are obviously and blatantly missing that you need to go back and follow up on, so be aware of that. Again, it's more of a straw man process flow that you're going to go back and take to them. Yes, sir?
How many interviews would you consider statistically relevant to use Six Sigma? Is there
What's little n to the big N?
Well, if you had to choose from an infinitive number of people available to you,
Yep.
where would you say this is okay? You don't want to interview them all.
No. I would always interview the manager of the swim lanes. So if it's a production scheduling swim lane, I would want to interview either the master scheduler or the production scheduler, and then a couple of planner analysts. I would want to, so sticking with that, once I was interviewing the planner analyst, if there was 15, I'd probably want to interview 1 or 2 and see how similar their stories were. If they were very dissimilar stories, then I would want to probably go back to the manager and find out why, first of all. You may need to look at how they stratify their functions. So if I've got one planner who does the furnaces, one planner who does the production line, one planner who does the assembly, it's quite likely they're each using different processing, so you need to understand some of the variations are the things that I typically look for.
But for the same role or function, minimum 2 to see if there's discrepancies. If there are,
Yes.
probably add 1 or 2 more to see if this is a
That's
trend.
right. Because
otherwise, keep it minimal, right?
That's right. Keep it minimal, but also make sure you're not accepting their biases. For example, and again, depending on the client, they may give you the most vocal planner in the group because he's not afraid to say what's on his mind, but he's also the most pessimistic planner in the whole wide world. He sees everything as half empty. They may give you the sheep who doesn't like to complain about, oh, everything's fine, everything's good. I do just like the book says. So you've got to make sure you're not getting artificial biases introduced, and that's why it's at least 2. And typically, and again, depending on the nature of the project and your relationship, I'll sometimes go back to their manager and say, here's what I heard from these 2 folks. Do you think most of your other ones would say about the same thing? So it's a checks and balances thing. So, because the last thing you want to do is put something up on the process flow that somebody in the room who gave you that piece of information is going to stand up and say, no, that's exactly what I told them we do, and I showed them how we do it. Otherwise, that can become troublesome very quickly.
So, what I try to do with these interviews is have an experienced guy
Yep,
and a newbie.
that's another way to start.
That's a very, very good way. Because a newbie, a lot of times they just do it by the book or do it like they have been told. And a lot of times they are not being told, but they've been taught by somebody else.
Right.
So you already have, there is no ish, or there is no induction or something.
Yep, no, that's a good point. That certainly is always, because really, I mean, what you're looking for here is distinctions and changes, right? In the context of KT language is what's distinct about this set of orders versus that set of orders. Well, so that's, again, it's like I tried to teach, and the contractors, again, are the hardest ones because they want to facilitate the distinctions and changes conversation. And A, the person you're interviewing isn't interested in having that conversation. And B, it's not value added to them to have that conversation. So we kind of need to keep KT process running like a background memory, is what I tell them. And when I hear something, say, ooh, that sounds like a distinction, I'll write that down, but it's not a matter of, hey, that sounds like a distinction, let me explain to you distinctions and changes, which I've seen people do. So again, it's you're trying to get information from them, you're not trying to teach them something, you're not trying to tell them something, you just want them to give you information as quickly and as respectfully of their time as possible. Benchmarking. So reviewing examples of scoping and planning, comparing against standards. So benchmarking, so tell me how it really works. I can benchmark that against their SOPs. In these particular cases, we took a sample of, and I'll show you the results of a lot of this stuff here a little bit later, but I think I took 50 or 75 work orders, and I basically said, all right, a work order is nothing more than a small project plan. And in my mind, a project plan ought to have objectives and work breakdown structure and resource requirements and responsibility, blah, blah, blah. So what I did was I took all 75 and I used KT process as a benchmark, and I said if I see even the slightest bit of evidence that they use this, I'm going to give it a 2. If I see they were kind of sort of trying to meet the intent of what I would call objectives, I gave it a 1. And if I saw 0 visible evidence that they even thought about objectives, I gave it a 0. And so we kind of quantified against KT's project management. And again, as long as you've got the client to buy into the fact that KT process is a good thing to benchmark against, if they don't know KT and they don't love KT, that can be troublesome as well.
Well, you can always refer back to PMI.
That's right, PMI and PMBOK, exactly. Yeah, so again, so we did some benchmarking against some standards. We also did some look around. Well, here's a description of what I just described. So yeah, meets the full intent. Present, and it was funny because on project statement, every single one got a 2 because every single work order had to have a title. So the title was it might not have been a good project statement, but
Yeah, or
fixed
the
pump.
computer says no.
Right, that's right. Fixed pump, project statement, good project statement. And there are a couple different ways we slice and dice it. So we sliced it by, does a person do a better job than other people? Do we do a better job when it's a high priority work order versus a low priority work order? Did we put more thought and do better job when it was a longer job versus a shorter job, when it was this kind of a job versus that kind of job? And again, it's all around distinctions and changes. Right? So why is it that performer A always does a good job? What is it? So that's the thinking. And we did a lot of big brown papers with their documents on them. So in this case, It's the first time I've done that today, but I always do this. In this case, and I'm the only one who can see what I'm pointing at. Can't really see it that well. What we had was a big brown paper, and we chose one scope of work that was about as good as it got. We chose another scope of work that was about on average what we were seeing, and we chose another scope of work that was pretty shitty. And so what we had was for each process step, so I had a process, so statement, objectives, work breakdown structure, and we just laid them out, and we put X's where there was 0, and showed the score a bit graphically. It was an interesting exercise, because as we're doing this, first of all, if you've done a brown paper presentation, this happens every time, is the more physical the work product, the more often they're up there saying, ooh, what is that? Yeah, that's Fred's job, and Fred did this, and Fred did that. And what was interesting was, for the top one, at least it was a pretty exemplar example of a scope of work. The manager of the planning function looked at it and said, well, no wonder that one's so good. Actually, the contractor did that one. So the contractor who was doing the work actually had a much more robust plan of how he was going to do it than a planner analyst who's supposed to be doing that for him. So it's those kinds of things that are the nuggets that just get people bought in really, really quick. Others, this PPA, one of the things we were showing, there's sort of some boilerplate templates, and again, the impetus for this whole project was around safety. And so there was, where PP&E is not PPA type thinking. And what they would have is a boilerplate, must wear PP&E, lockouts and tagouts required for all of it. When working at heights today, when working in confined space. It was just this boilerplate list of everything that could possibly be a safety violation that they would cut and paste into these things. And so what we were trying to show was the PPA thinking that we were hoping to find but didn't was what's unique about this job that the basic safety requirements aren't going to help with, that I need to tell them about specific to this piece of work. And so we didn't find a whole lot of that thinking. It was the basic boilerplate. Oh, don't forget to wear your hard hat. So again, but the benchmarking was against, and PPA was standard, is not only potential problems, but also likely causes and contingent preventive actions. You should see all that thinking because you're putting people in pretty hazardous situations, and it'd be sure nice to have that thinking ahead of time. So again, the graphic depiction of it tells a really powerful story, and it's real hard for them to stand up and say, in each and every case, we do really robust PPA-like thinking around safety, and oh, wait a minute, maybe not in every case. Right? So again, it's you're trying to put them in a slightly uncomfortable position. Again, we tried to quantify, and this, one could argue this is more quantitative than qualitative, but these were the kinds of things we were able to show them is, guess what, in most cases, everybody got credit for doing a statement. We do a pretty good job of saying the date we want the work to happen, but everything else is kind of crap. We also, this one was looking, based on, we found it interesting that the more contractors that were physically going to be co-located doing the work, the more robustly we thought about the work itself, as opposed to just 1 or 2 guys, they'll know, they'll figure it out when they get there, versus it's 4 or 5, probably ought to put a little bit more thinking in. So again, just being able to show them the impact of what they were doing. Then this top one up in the right-hand corner was the same planner on, depending on what work order he's working on, can do a really good job or a really piss poor job. So it's not even within the same person a consistent process, let alone across planners and across departments. So auditing permits to work, and again, this is where one of the questions that Rich Van Camp always asks me, and Joelle Rivera always asks me is, well, why does somebody have to be in the OE group? Can't I send Trina Crockett out to the mine? And the answer is yes, you can. You don't have to be a miner with an E, not an O. They don't allow miners on site. Sorry for English language pun, which I actually, I'll tell you after the break. So one of the things they have is a permit to work, and a permit to work is issued by the owner of the area, not the contracts administrator. And what it is about having a conversation with the contractor to explain the unique conditions of the day that they may not have been aware of. So in other words, the contractor might work there every day, but today there's a leak a level above and it's got a puddle of water that you need to be, so those kinds of conversations. And so one of the things that we did was we audited their permits to work. And so it was, no, we don't have it. So the permit to work was essentially a series of labels with a box next to it. And so what you would find is people just check, 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 check. And so what we agreed with the client was if they're literally, so yes, you're working at heights, check. But if the conversation's also supposed to include, and there are spaces for commentary, if it's supposed to have been a conversation about a unique condition, because that's always been at height, will always be at height, but there's a unique condition today, we would expect to see some sort of writing on the permit to work that says, and oh, by the way, I warned him about this. And so we did an audit against that as well to again show, doesn't mean they're not having the conversation, but that's the only evidence or non-evidence that we have, so let's take a look and see what it's telling us. We also did some DILO studies. So we did a day in the life study and did shift startups and all those kinds of things and documented what they talked about, where they talked, how long they talked, what topics they covered, etc. And then the work permit, so
Is that representative? If you're sitting in the room, do you expect them to behave like in normal days, or is that?
it is always going to have a positive Hawthorne skewing to it. So they will always try and do what they think they're supposed to do because you're watching.
This makes it worse.
Which it obscures some of what probably really happens when nobody's looking. The longer the observation, the more likely you are to get better information. You know, they'll start out in the morning and be all Mr. Rigid and regulation, and then by the end of the day, it's and then part of that is a danger on our part is because we become buddies, and you know, all of a sudden say, yeah, I'm not supposed to do this, but I'm going to go over here and do this because, and sometimes we let those things go and we shouldn't. So, yeah, so we know, and the funny thing is even when they are aware of their observation and see what we're writing down and everything else, 9 times out of 10 they still get enough ammunition to be able to say, yeah, it's still kind of crappy. And that was when they were on their best behavior. So imagine what it's like, you know. So again, so we audited against some standards around the permit to work, and we took a month's census. We did some analysis around, did some basically meeting studies. The pre-job review was a meeting study type thing, which I'll talk about all these things here in a minute. And then time distribution, and we did this via survey. We actually did a survey monkey survey of all the planner analysts and asked them to categorize how they spent their days. So here's your pie of work, and tell me what percentage of work A, you do, B, what you wish you could do, and C, what it should be. So again, it was just a way of taking a look. And it was interesting. If you look at the administration, the operations group obviously spent a lot more of their day filling out paperwork than the other ones did. So that's an area of opportunity. So it's just looking for those areas of opportunity. This was, what is this? Oh, I know what this was. We put together basically a booklet of trip tickets. So we made up this form and had them bound into little tiny books. And we gave them to each of the contracts administrators. And we said, we want you to do 2 things. Every time you walk out to the site to look at a piece of work that you're overseeing, tell us how long it took to get there, because this is not a small facility. So one of the complaints that we were hearing is, well, I'd love to go out there, but it's 10,000 miles away and it takes me forever to get there, yada, yada, yada. So if you think it takes a long time, let's see if we can get some data around that. So how long it takes to get there, how much time did you spend, and generally speaking, what did you find when you got there, and what did you talk about? And so, and again, compliance was maybe 50 to 75% accurate. Some actually, and positioning it, and this is another one of those you learn as you go along, is getting somebody to do that is not always the easiest thing. It's not like they don't have other shit to be doing for the day. So the way we tried to position it was, look, you know how much pain you're in, you know how difficult it is to actually get out of the office with all the other stuff you have to do. Here's your chance to demonstrate how bad it is for you on a daily basis, and that's what this book is going to help us tell the story to your managers who are in a position where they can change something and do something about it. So trying as best you can to make it in their best interest, even though it's extra work and we know it's kind of a pain and you're going to forget sometimes, that's fine. Again, it's not...
It's your personal benefit performance.
That's right, exactly. So we did that. We took a look at, they did actually a pretty good job of capturing delays on equipment and delays on job. Most of the projects were bid on time and expenses, so in order to get paid, they had to explain why they were over their estimates. They used delay reporting to do that. So we took a look at that data. So, I think that's good. Yeah, didn't need to go that far. So again, getting ready to go talk to people, getting ready to start gathering that data around the process flow is also a piece of the qualitative work. We are, believe, at a, yeah. Oh, I just went through a bunch of this. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I'm up to there.